Jesus Christ. One of the many ways that we celebrate in our culture Christmas is with the use of lights. Extra lights everywhere. We have Christmas trees on the stage that are lighted. We have Christmas trees in Grand Central that have lights strung about them. We light an Advent candle every Christmas. And some of you this week or not this week or last week, have gone out into the community, driven around to those special neighborhoods where they put on the big light show. And you go and you look at the different houses and you enjoy the lights, whether it's a string of lights on a Christmas tree or a string of lights on an outdoor tree, a string of lights on railings, a string of lights over the entire house. We can enjoy the lights of Christmas. Just absolutely beautiful, beautiful. Some of you may want to put up a sign like that on the right. It's kind of a simple approach to the Christmas lights. Kind of like that. Well, whether most people are conscious of it or not, there's a strong connection between the Christmas story and light. It's not some accidental thing that happened like, oh, let's do lights with Christmas. No, they're intimately connected, the idea of Christmas and lights. And we find about the light of Christmas in the Gospel of John, chapter 1. You can turn there if you would. John chapter 1. John starts by saying, in the beginning was the Word. And last week we recognized that the Word was none other than the Son of God. In the beginning was the Word, that is, the Son of God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and He was with God in the beginning. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing is that has been made. He is the creator of all things, the Son of God. We also saw last week that He is the sustainer of all things. And we recognized that whether we're talking about the planet Earth or the beating of my heart, Jesus Christ had a part in creating these things, and He right now is actively the sustainer of these things. The earth doesn't fall apart because Jesus is sustaining it. My heart doesn't stop beating because Jesus is sustaining it. Now, that doesn't preclude being good stewards of the earth or good stewards of our body, but we recognize that Jesus Christ, the Word, from the beginning has been part of all creation. And that's how John begins his Christmas story. He says the Word, the Son of God, was God and was with God. But if you look at John chapter 1, verse 9, you get a little bit more of the Christmas story. The Apostle John writes, the true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. John is saying that something special is happening at Christmas. Light is coming. And not just any kind of light, but true light. And this light is the Son of God. This isn't just John's opinion, because later in the gospel, he actually quotes the Son of God, who says in John 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. I am the light of the world. The coming of the Son of God that we celebrate this season is wrapped up in the coming of light into a dark world. This is the pre-Christmas story of John, the coming of light, he says. It's on its way. But then John keeps writing, and he brings us right to Christmas Day. John chapter 1, verse 14. In fact, it should be on the screen, and I invite you to read it with me. John chapter 1, verse 14. The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. We have seen His glory, glory of the one and only. Last week, we considered the first phrase. The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. And as we look to the Old Testament, we discovered that this phrase, made His dwelling among us, actually means, in the original language, He pitched His tent with us. We said last week, He pitched His tent at street level with us. Creator, Son of God, in the flesh, pitched His tent here. And we talked about the fact that now that Jesus has gone back into heaven, we continue to be the tent. Because the tent was a place of meeting in the Old Testament between humanity and God. The tent was a place where people came to worship. The tent was a place where they connected with God, and God connected with them. That was Jesus Christ, and He still is the centerpiece of our connection. There's no question about it. But He has gone into heaven and has promised to come back again, but He has left His church here, and we now pitch our tent at street level. It's a big tent, the church. And then individually, as we go out into our world, we're like pup tents. And we pitch our tent wherever we go because our lives become a place of meeting for others. Our relationships with others help connect others in a relationship with God. Just as Jesus pitched His tent at street level, He calls all of us to do the same. So we talked about that last week. He made His dwelling among us. And this week, we're going to talk about light. And the phrase that says, we have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only. Repeat after me. We have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only. Well, what does that mean? We have seen His glory. Well, let's understand glory first. In the Greek language in which the New Testament is written, the word for glory is doxa, from which we derive our word doxology, that is, giving praise to God. Doxa talks about praise and offering it up to God. And when we do that, we're giving God glory. But the word glory also refers to that which is bright. It refers to light. Glory has the idea of something that's emanating light, and it reveals something to us. And as you read the Bible, you find out that the glory of God, when it's present, is revealing God to those who are present. The manifest presence of God among us is the glory of God. The awareness that God has pitched His tent in our midst, in effect, is glory. Even if we don't physically see light, we understand spiritually that this is the glory of God, to be among His people and to be with us. Let's take a look back in the Old Testament again, as we did last week, to better understand the glory of God. There are several Old Testament passages I want to highlight. And in these passages, you're going to find that there's two things linked with God's presence among His people in the Old Testament. One is a cloud, and the other is glory, sometimes referred to as smoke and sometimes light, smoke and fire. These images are the glory of God among His people. So look with me at Exodus chapter 24, verses 15 to 16. Moses has already received the Ten Commandments. There's been trouble in the camp, and Moses is now going back up on Mount Sinai to recommit and renew the covenant with God. And it says in chapter 24 of Exodus, verses 15 to 16, when Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. So you got cloud and glory there, representing that God's presence is there. And then in Exodus 25, the next chapter, God gives Moses instructions about building a tent, which is called a tabernacle in the Old Testament. A tabernacle is a Latin word for tent. And so there's going to be a tent that God is building, and we're told in chapter 25 that the tent is to be a place of dwelling for God, not a limited place. God is everywhere present. But God manifests Himself, chooses to make His presence known at certain times and places. He says, I want you to build a tent because I want to dwell among my people. Now, the tent is made, and it's called a tabernacle, and it becomes a meeting place for God and His people. And in Exodus 40, we read this. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle, verse 34, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tabernacle because the cloud had settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Here's an artist's rendering of the tabernacle. The tent in the middle is the place where God dwelt, and the outer walls were a protective element to keep people from inadvertently wandering in, and it created a space for God. And you'll see right at the far end of that tent, there's a pillar of cloud. The artist is trying to represent the presence of God there in a cloud. And that would be right over what's called the Holy of Holies, the most holy place in the tabernacle. There was an item called the Ark of the Covenant, and there were two angels on top with wings, and it said that the presence of God resided there. Again, not a limiting event, but a focused event for the people of God to know their God. So during the day, there would be this cloud, and then during the night, there would be fire mixed into the cloud. And this was called fire or light or glory. The glory of the Lord was there. Now, I keep reading in Exodus 40, verse 36, in all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and the fire was in the cloud by night, in sight of all the house of Israel during their travels. Now, this is called, that is the glory, the fire, the light, is called the Shekinah glory. Shekinah glory. Shekinah comes from the Hebrew word, which means to settle in or to dwell in. And so what you have here is the idea, once again, of God dwelling among us, but now it's His glory dwelling in us, dwelling among us, dwelling in this tent. Now, the glory of God. What is it besides light and bright and His manifest presence? How do we get it even more tangible? The glory of God refers to the words of God, the works of God, the wonders of God, the ways of God, all stirred together. The experiences you have had in your life where God has worked in an amazing way. Maybe a loved one was healed. Maybe a deep depression was lifted. Maybe there was sickness in your home and God provided in an amazing way the finances needed to pay the bills. There are works of God in our lives and even wonders of God in our lives and ways that He moves in our lives through relationships in the local church. All of these things wrapped together are the glory of God because they reveal something. They shine a light on the character of God and His amazing love for us, in His amazing grace and mercy toward us. So the Shekinah glory of God was in the tabernacle. It rested there in the midst of the people. And what we have then is the glory of God and the work of God going hand in hand. Those things which He did reveals His glory, and His glory is worked out in those things which He did. Exodus chapter 15, verse 11. The question is asked, who is like you, majestic and awesome in glory, working wonders? Do you see the word glory and the word working there? They go hand in hand in the Scriptures. Psalm 19, verse 1. Let's read it together. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Psalm 104, verse 3. Let's read that together. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in His work. What we have here is Hebrew poetry. It's called parallelism. And the Hebrew poets would write a line of truth, of praise, of information, and then they would write it again, but using a little different language. So when you have these set against each other, we are seeing that the poet, the author, is saying the glories of God and the works of God are hand in hand. They're the same thing. And then in Psalm 145, verses 4 and 6, one generation will commend your works to another. They will tell of your mighty acts. They will speak of the, say it with me, glorious splendor of your majesty, and I will meditate on your wonderful works. They will tell the power of your awesome works, and I will proclaim your great deeds. We are called in the Scriptures to tell stories, to talk about the works of God, the glories of God, that we have seen and that we have experienced. Now, this all comes back to John chapter 1, verse 14. We have seen His glory.